It's funny. I remember my first day of teaching in China, and the principal said to me something that I thought was so cheesy at the time, I almost got nauseous. He said, "Students don't care what you know until they know how much you care." And I thought that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And then I started teaching, and I realized how true that is.
Sean is a recruiter, facilitator, and career coach who started his professional career as a teacher. But when he returned to Canada and found the job market saturated, he used his skills to pivot into another career he finds equally rewarding. He shares his expertise and advice so you too can pivot from the classroom to another industry. And it all starts now.
Welcome to 85 After School. I'm your host, Nicole, and this is the podcast about teacher career and retirement planning through real-life stories of those who live it.
So as we continue our journey in our special summer series, we have another fabulous expert, a career coach. Sean, it's so great that you're here today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And thank you very much. I love being in this space and talking about careers and journeys and what's next. And I'm grateful to have a chance to tell my story and hope I can provide some value today to your listeners.
And I love your story. And we're going to start there. Can you tell us about your career path?
Sure. Back when I graduated around 2000, the market was such that, and the expectation was, get a degree, and then you'll find a job somewhere out there in the corporate world, and, you find yourself on that trajectory. And I landed a job at university through a contact of mine in procurement. I was doing hardware and software computer procurement for a large national corporation, was making good money. I was sort of sitting there in the cubicle after a couple of years and realizing that this isn't what I feel like I was meant to do. I had considered career in teaching at the time. It didn't feel like it was the right match. And so I took what was more comfortable and, stayed in that cubicle job and realized, I need to go out and see the world. And I just kept getting ads about teaching English overseas. So I decided, hey, let's go over for 1 year and see how it goes. Went to Korea for 1 year. I came back 3 years later because it really was that transformative experience. And I realized I want to be a teacher. This is, my dad was in education. My sister's a teacher as well. And as much as I wanted to resist following in their footsteps, it really felt like it was the right fit for me. And so I got my teaching degree. And at that time, this was 2009. We know there were not a lot of teaching jobs available. So we went back overseas as well to teach at an international school. So not just teaching English, teaching a primary junior curriculum at a British international school in China, which was awesome. And then my first daughter was born there. So let's come back for a year and see how it goes. And again, there were no teaching jobs at the time, which I would have happily stepped into. So I got involved in education recruitment. There was a company that recruited teachers to teach overseas. And I was very passionate both about careers in education and extremely passionate about the experience of living overseas and living in another country and how transformative that was for me. So I found a real sense of meaning and purpose in this role and helping teachers think about what it might be like to take their skills and their life abroad for a couple of years. And then somebody in my networks reached out to me and said, hey, you're a pretty decent public speaker. I've seen you at some functions. We have a role here at CP Ontario that engages with post-secondary students and helps them with their career exploration into careers in accounting and finance. A lot of the skills and interests that I'm looking for, and then a chance to also be involved in teaching workshops. So some adult education development type roles there really spoke to me, and I took the leap and have really flourished in that regard. And from there, I now have side work that I also do freelance in terms of skills facilitation, adult education, keynote speaking, and so on. So indirectly, I found myself into the education and learning development space, and I'm really loving that career. And I also get a chance to work with a lot of career changes as well, which I think is one of the ways I can provide value in this conversation. So I still think about teaching very much. I have kids in the education system, but at this point in my career, I'm on the trajectory that I find is the right fit for me, and that's how I got here.
What a wonderful journey to think you finished your education journey by having your bachelor's of education, jumping back overseas, learning so much from cultural integration in China and being able to teach the British curriculum. So you're a global citizen at this point, Sean. So I'm wondering, what assistance have you been able to provide for teachers, specifically teachers that are thinking, that's it, I want to pivot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that when it comes to thinking about a career change, there's a few things that are involved. First of all, we need to learn what is out there. What are the pathways available? Let's not reinvent the wheel here. There are lots and lots of educators who have made transitions like this to both the public and private sectors that it's worth spending the time exploring. Because if we're going to go through the effort and the work to put ourselves on that pathway, whether that's training up with certifications or whether it's going back to school for a Master of Education in adult education, whether it's getting to learning development, whether going to HR functions and so on, it's really helpful to know what are the careers that are out there, what were the steps involved to get there, and is it something that I'm going to see that's going to be the right fit? Because when we're talking about careers, you really can't get a sense of it from just a LinkedIn profile or a job posting. We need to know far more about the day-to-day. What does it actually feel like? What is going to be motivating? Where is the connection to purpose? What are the values of the organization? What is the culture? Every organization is so different. And if you're talking about specific roles such as project manager, customer service manager, you're going to want to look at the different industries out there. So first is really that inspiration. Finding the inspiration, finding the people, finding the mentors that have been through that process is key, because then once you're inspired and are motivated towards that pathway, you can really stick it out through what it's going to take to get there. And there are things you're going to need to get there. We're going to need to skill up. We're going to need to start transitioning some of our skills that we use in education, and we need to reframe them in business language. It's about those transferable skills and understanding things like lesson planning. Well, that in business language would be project management, classroom management. All those are leadership, thinking on your feet skills. Differentiated instruction would be customer personalization, parent communication, that stakeholder engagement, right? Assessment, feedback, performance metrics and KPIs, curriculum design, that's content development. So understanding that we need to take all of the language from the ecosystem in the education world, which is kind of a unique bubble in some ways, and transition that into corporate speak, and then finding a way of telling our story so that those transferable skills come out in conversation. organizations. One of the challenges that often we see with educators is, when you're applying for a director of finance role and you've been a manager of a finance role for 10 years, that's an easy transition. But we're talking about a position in the corporate world which may not directly translate from education. So there can be a hurdle there. And sometimes it's not as easy to stand out in the application process. And that's why some of the activities that involve person-to-person connections, informational interviews, coffee chats, some of your boots on the ground networking is going to help to be able to make a bit more of a personal connection where people can understand your brand a little differently and not see your lack of corporate experience as a barrier, but in some ways, in a way that you tell that story, as an asset.
Yeah, you gave so much information there, and I'm sure the listeners are soaking it all in. And in your experience, Sean, having that background as a teacher, understanding the lingo, because education has a jargon on its own, and then being able to translate that into business lingo, what types of industries, you hinted a little bit, like customer service, project management, those trained as teachers, what are they suitable for in your experience helping some of these individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the stuff that came to mind myself with my experience are things like instructional design, e-learning. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry now of skilling up employers. I just came back from a huge HR conference in Denver, and it was really speaking to the fact that we are in a major transition, and it costs a lot more money for a company to bring in new people of talent. That could cost up to $80,000 per head. It's much cheaper, much more effective to upskill those current employees. And so those range from anything from technical skills to important soft skills or human skills. There's a huge industry for it. There's companies that do it in-house. There's companies that hire some of the freelance organizations I work with to do that training as well. So that is a real natural transition from being either a corporate trainer or learning and development specialist, but also creating some of the courses. So many organizations will have modules that they create. We see things like project managers or program coordinators, customer success, HR and talent development, right? You're as a teacher, as an educator, you are setting a performance plan, if you will, setting goals and just doing curriculum design and individual learning plans to bring your students up to certain performance metrics. Well, that is what HR does in-house with teams, not only that they're scaling up performance managing, writing content, editing, being an education consultant, the companies that sell these e-learning. There's a lot of sales roles that teachers can get into as well in terms of ed tech and things on that nature. So all the companies in all the industries are doing learning and development and skilling up. And so it really depends on the size of the company. That might be something they do in-house. And there's a LinkedIn group, for example, called Teachers Transitioning to Corporate. So I know educators don't typically live on LinkedIn as much, but it is a massive area to reskill in. It is not just your digital resume. It is not Facebook for business people. It is your ability to articulate those transferable skills, your ability to teach people how to talk about your story, right? That's what personal branding is. It's the intentional telling of your story in a strategic way. And so use those groups to both find people that have transitioned as well. You're going to find a lot of people that have gone on this pathway before you. We're going to be able to give you some really great advice. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, if you go around asking for a job, you're going to get advice instead. But if you go around asking for advice, sometimes you get a job. In my experience, the goal is to try and build as many relationships as you can. And to build that likability very quickly, I found it's simply a matter of asking good questions and asking for advice. What happens when you ask somebody for advice? Well, you make them feel important and knowledgeable, valuable, insightful, experienced. You make them feel that they have impact on you. There's so much value that people have in being able to give somebody advice. And I'm doing it right now, having a blast. So, I think that people underestimate the power of not only the effectiveness of the relationship building that takes place when you ask for advice, and of course the great advice you get, but how much easier it is to bring your authentic self to a conversation when you're not worrying about saying impressive things. You're not stuck in your own head. You're actually focused on the other person. For me, that's helped to be a bit more authentic when I go into these conversations, which are absolutely necessary for any professional in any industry.
Yeah, and so much wisdom can be shared, and you don't have to drop thousands of dollars to upskill or anything like that. You find a good network and a good community that is enthusiastic about the subject, and it's just great learning. I'm wondering, if you look at the top 5 transferable skills that teachers possess, what would those be in the corporate or business world, if you can generalize?
Yeah, absolutely. So, anything that is sort of outcome-based. So project management is really important. When you look at, designing a curriculum and the resources and the timing and the assessments and the check-ins and the ongoing assessment, all of that has to be timed very, very well. Teachers know how to work with very slim budgets. So that's something that we can sometimes see, as well as project development. So, being able to kind of go through the conceptual to the delivery to the reflection afterwards is something that employers are all looking for. Again, understanding customer service with our customers inside the organization, of course, externally facing with their customers, investors, and stakeholders, being able to meet them where they're at, being able to pick up on nuances in conversations, being able to be productive in these client meetings or these customer service, act with empathy when talking to a customer, seeing things from their point of view, helping to reduce sort of conflict. All of those skills are very much within the classroom management skill set that teachers would know very well. When we're talking about performance metrics and KPIs, that's assessment. Feedback is more than a buzzword these days. Some of the most frequent requests we get at Skills Camp, where I work with facilitation, is around how to have those difficult conversations. How do we bring feedback into the regular discourse? So teachers know very well how to go soft on the person and hard on the problem, and put specific, being objective, talking about things that are specifically observed, talking about the alternatives, and then following up with that. Those types of conversations and that feedback skill really transfers into creating and setting those goals and those performance metrics. And again, when it comes to curriculum design, and that's content development. There's lots of communications work. There's even stuff within marketing and PR that talk about how do we put content out there? How do we take content from our users and our stakeholders, and how do we curate that in a way that tells a good story and really showcases the effectiveness of our product and services? So, those are some of the transferable skills that are important that there's a huge market for. And we can't expect the hiring managers that maybe haven't worked with a teacher before that are looking through this. And of course, there's also lots of algorithms that are being used on these recruitment sites that we need to understand what those algorithms are looking for. Obviously, your branding statement is one of them. So an example of a good branding statement from a teacher in transition might sound like former educator, aspiring L&D specialist, skilled in curriculum design and stakeholder engagement. But then we want to tell that story. And you should talk about what you're passionate about. Articulate your why. Teachers should think about, what is their why? Why are they doing this? Why do you want to get into L&D? Why do you want to get into customer personalization or facilitation? What difference are you trying to make? What impact are you trying to make, and lead with that? Because people can connect with that. It also makes you memorable in the conversations. And then you want to make sure that you are having your skills identified. So if you're connecting with all the teachers, they're going to say to you, oh, classroom management, curriculum design, but you need to have people using that business jargon. And there's really nothing wrong with reaching out to people in your network and saying, hey, I'm career transitioning right now. I'm looking to get some of the endorsements on my LinkedIn profile. And last thing I'll say that it's important to also be really active on LinkedIn. A lot of employers aren't necessarily worried about your strict technical skills. They know they can upskill you on that, but they want to know is, can you communicate? Are you professional? People who can collaborate, who can think critically, who can problem solve, who, when you come into the company, you're going to sit with the team in the lunchroom and build culture and cohesion. So if that's what they're looking for, where do you show the evidence of that? That you're someone that's going to really contribute to this organization beyond just the 9 to 5 and the bare minimum. It's not just about having a good resume. It's your chance to post any of the work that you've done. Have you done curricular design? Let's throw some stuff up there. Have you had a website before? Anything that showcases your skills and what you've done. This is a perfect way to put that out there for people to see.
I love the engagement that you're talking about because it's interpersonal skills. And with teachers wearing so many hats nowadays, where teaching might be actually at the bottom of the list of things they have to do during the day, and that whole social emotional learning and gauging where their stakeholders are at makes them a perfect employee to be addressing those interpersonal skills. And they'll learn quickly on the technical aspects as well.
Absolutely. And emotional intelligence. Let's not forget that. That's an absolute, there's lots of research that shows that across all industries, people with a higher EQ outperform those with a higher IQ in every single industry everywhere. The question becomes, how do I show them that I have that? Through my storytelling, my branding, through some specific experiences I have, and how I talk about the work that I do.
Yeah, and I like that when you said you have to explain your why, because then the passion comes out automatically, answering what problems you solve during the day. And that goes in line with the why question. Like, what problems do you solve?
Exactly. And again, like a teacher it's a phase of your life, but it doesn't define who you are and what you're about and why you do it. There's another personal branding conversation starter, just kind of the how, so the wow, how, now. And so you start off with that statement. It sounds right. So I teach students that the human skills are not taught in the classroom to help them reach their full potential. And that's going to be that kind of wow. And it makes people go like, well, help me understand that. Like, tell me a bit more about that. Right. And when we ask people what they do, it sometimes immediately puts them on the defensive that I now have to justify my existence in some way. But whether or not I'm working with CB Ontario, or I'm freelancing with Skills Camp, or I'm doing my own business on the side, that what I do, teaching people the human skills are not taught in the classroom, doesn't change. So that's something that really should be part of your branding statement and something you should lead with. So I go with the wow, and then how, and then what am I working on now.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Sean, you mentioned, I know that you are working full time and you do work on contractual basis, but you also have this consulting business. Maybe you can describe for the listeners what your consultant business is about and how you can support teachers that are looking to pivot and need someone like you in their life in order to help them find that pathway to their next career.
Sure. Yeah. So I work with organizations that want to partner or have me into develop doing specialized learning development, especially when it comes to human skills and communication skills and collaboration skills. So it depends on the client need, but what are their team looking for? What are their students need that they're supporting? So the consulting work I do is typically within organizations as a whole, but any of the individual listeners on here are interested in connecting with me directly, feel free. I like to make myself available for coffee chats. If someone wants to reach out to me and they have specific questions, I encourage them to do so on LinkedIn.
Oh, that's great. And through LinkedIn, we'll put that in the show notes if they want to reach out to you directly, Sean. I'm going to get a little bit more practical, perhaps. How should a teacher prepare a resume to be seriously considered for a non-education job? And you've spoken about the lingo, you've spoken about the algorithms. Is there anything else beyond that they should really zero in on? Start from scratch, I'm assuming?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that most teachers have not done since they applied for their first school. There's lots of stuff out there to build those basic resumes, but ChatGPT is an incredible tool. If it helps, take your resume as a teacher and literally just put it in as a teacher with all language as a teacher, and then ask ChatGPT to transition this into the business language that you need. Remembering that most people, hiring managers, they're going to do two things at once. Have the right keywords there that any digital algorithm can pick up on, but also notice that the human eyes are going to look at it for 4 to 6 seconds. And so it's got to pop and be clear with everything on that first page. And so even if we've been in one role, what I would suggest you do, if you've been a teacher at the same school with the same level of responsibility, let's try to break out some of the other things that you've done. Yes, I've been a primary junior teacher at Joe Smith Elementary School, but I'm sure that you've also been involved in some committees, or you've been a lead coach for the team, or whatever that is. So let's put those in there, those distinct roles that you have wherever possible. And then we want to be really clear about ways that different performance metrics, resume people love numbers. They love to know how we went from here to there. And so this can be a little more challenging as a teacher, because it's not like you can say, I had a student engagement at 28%, which I increased to 50%, or I increased sales. You get the students, but you can talk about the how many individualized learning plans that you did. Anything you can quantify as much as you can, how many students you've had, how many classes, what you've been involved in, put all of that in there, and then really speak to the skills that were applied. What you want to avoid is sort of 10 lines per role. You want to try to show wherever possible, yes, I've been in this role, but here's how I've grown, here's how I've upskilled, here's how I've continued to add value, here are some of the performance metrics around that as best that I can. And go get some advice. As you're talking to people, as you're networking, go and say, look, I know you're not I'm talking to you who's a HR consultant, and you've been really helping me, or you're a learning development specialist. I know you're not a recruiter, but can I get your advice on what you think this resume looks like? There's so many resources out there. It shouldn't be too hard. The goal here, though, is not to just rely on the resume. There's so much more conversationally that you're going to be able to tell in your story. You have that face-to-face conversation. So I encourage folks to look for what we call information interviews. Talking to people who are in the role, or even potentially recruiters for different companies, and to say, hey, is there anyone available for a coffee chat? I just want to learn about the organization, learn about the culture, learn about what sort of skills are the most in demand, to see if potentially there's a fit for me to apply. Also to understand what are some of the big changes that are coming in the organization, what are the skills, top skills that are going to be needed in 2, 3, 4 years, so I can start skilling up for those. I mean, a recruiter's job is to get as many people to apply to the company as possible and to give information about that company. So if you're calling saying, hey, I want a job, you may get rejected. If you're calling saying, hey, I'm looking for more information and someone to connect to, generally speaking, that is going to be very attractive to them and they'll be willing to do it.
Great advice there. Very practical. I know teachers need to rethink and then reverbiage or use different vocabulary. And I like what you said about neat and succinct. So let's assume that resume hit the algorithm properly. They get moved to the top of the pile and they're going for this interview. How do they survive the interview process when all their experience is based on being the coach at school, teaching primary, junior, or high school, or whatever it may be? What are some of the advice that you have to change that narrative and maybe add in, how do you brand yourself then into the other industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, remember, it's not just working with students, of course. There's lots of other stakeholders. There's staff and leadership within the board in the school. And of course, parents is a really big one. There's event management that they've been a part of. So there's stuff that's related to the government and what is the law that we worry about. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are applicable to policies and procedures within an organization. But call out the elephant in the room, and say, like, you have to tell the story the way you want it to be told. And if I have an understanding that, well, you working with high school students is different than working with our IT team, and I see that as a disadvantage, and you come in talking about it as a disadvantage, and I'll think of it as a disadvantage. You have to rephrase it as an advantage. You have to talk about the diverse groups that you've worked with. I didn't just work with high school students, but I worked with high school students with different languages, different abilities in times of high conflict, and all the while getting their buy-in and trying to build relationships. You've got the team skills. You understand the importance of getting buy-in from people, how to speak persuasively to people, and you using your experience with high school students or grade 6 students really speaks to the fact that you've had demonstrated the skill set in a far more challenging environment than in a corporate one. When you are walking in confidently saying, this is going to prepare me extra compared to the other candidates who are in the hallway, then they'll start to think of it that way too. And so when it comes to any interview, there is going to be a question, tell me about yourself. Why do you want this role? And this is where you're going to go into the why statement. But then you need to prepare yourself for scenario questions. So they're going to ask you typical scenario questions. Give me a time when you had a conflict with a team member. What did you do and how did you resolve it? Give me a time where you had a difficult supervisor or you disagreed with something and you had to challenge them on it. Or you saw a colleague do something unethical. What did you do? How did you take initiative? Do you have a difficult client or customer? I can tell you about a few parents articulating that in some ways, but I would encourage you in as many as examples as you can. There will be times where strategically it makes sense to talk about difficult students, and you really need to bring that understanding over so they can see how it would be applicable. Because you don't just say, I had a difficult student, and this is how I dealt with it. You say, I had a difficult student, I dealt with it, but this informs my skill set when I approach my team members. And when we had a staff meeting that was challenging, I took that same skill set and I applied it this way, and this was the outcome. And that's what I'll bring to this skill when I work with teams here. So you've got to bridge that gap for them and make it really, really clear. And the other thing I was going to say is you really want to make sure there's a STAR method. We're talking about situation, task, action, and result. Whenever giving an example of a scenario, what was the situation? What were your specific actions? And then what were the results of that, right? How did you measure success in that area? And so that's the kind of stuff that you want to talk about in the interview wherever possible.
Yeah, that's a great acronym. And I think teachers that are finding mentors, that are finding opportunities to shadow in the direction they want to go, and then really take their time. They have 2 months in the summer. And so something you mentioned earlier about the great resource of LinkedIn or any other professional social media. In your opinion, how important is it to create a personal brand?
It's vitally important. You will have a brand whether you like it or not. So the question is, what kind of brand do you want? Jeff Bezos says your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So really think about, what do we want people to say about us when we're not there? And how do we get them to say the things about us that are leading us to the outcomes that we want? And so, every interaction is an interview. Every time you speak to somebody, they're shaping their perspective of you. There's several quotes that I speak to in my workshops. And one of them is that in business, all things being equal, people want to do business with their friends. People want to do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. And so we do this exercise. And all the things that you want somebody to spend extra time mentoring you. You want someone to give you extra advice and insights, coffee chats, mentorship, referrals, references, more business, more sales, more promotions, special project access. All of the outcomes you will want that will help vault your career forward are far more likely to happen if someone knows you and they like you and they trust you. And how do we know that's true? You all just said it. When we talk about trust, the best way to build trust, A, is to always show up and be consistent, but you never want to ask for the job, which sounds crazy. Why am I doing all this stuff about looking for a job? We know you're looking for a job. And so when you ask me for the job, it says, you're just here talking to me because this is a transaction. You just want my check, my gatekeeper, whatever, instead of trying to invest in me and build this actual relationship with me. And then we talked about how to get people to know you well. There's no other substitute. They're not coming to your house. You got to join groups. You got to go join meetups. You got to be part of associations, be part of LinkedIn. Networking is not who you know, it's who knows you. And so what are you doing to be known? So people can talk about you, so they can remember you. And in terms of building likability, we talked about it a little bit, but I always use that great quote from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so networking is not selling yourself. Networking is selling the experience of talking to you. If somebody has a positive experience of talking to you, it is simple math. They're going to want more of that experience, and that's what we want. So how do we build likability? It's very simple. Stop trying to be the most important person in the conversation. Focus on the other person. Let them be the center of attention. Ask them questions. Ask them for advice. Go through that great empowerment exercise of letting them know that they're valuable, important, special, knowledgeable. And if you can do that, I mean, believe me, if someone knows you and they like you and they trust you and they know about a job, they're going to tell you.
Yeah.
That the most effective networking is actually the easiest. And that's ego aside and focus on them. Get out of your own head and just ask questions. Be curious, smile, follow up, be grateful. And if you can do that, people are going to want to do more things to help you.
Yeah, it's that law of attraction, right? People want to be around positive people, but you have to be authentic, obviously.
You have to be authentic,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love that because it sounds simple, but it's hard to implement. Teachers have that perfect opportunity to really take your time to make that pivot the most successful as possible.
Yeah. So I think that's really the mental shift here, is not to meet somebody new because I need to get. I need to meet somebody new because I want to give. And I think, well, why are so many people interested in being mentors? Because people love giving advice and they love feeling that they had impact on you. And so what you're giving them is the gift of your curiosity and your interest by asking those questions. The 15 minutes they spent mentoring you and giving you their advice, I guarantee you was the best 15 minutes of their day. And so you have a lot to offer. So willing as you're willing to give of your authentic questions and curiosity. And I'm glad you brought up, it is so important to be authentic. It's not just about being extroverted or being high energy. It's none of those things. And human beings are very, very good at feeling when someone's not being authentic. The key is to make the goal about, I want to be in this conversation because I want to learn from you. I want to be inspired from you. And I want to get to know you as a person. You know that when you come with genuine curiosity and questions and interest and gratitude, that the person's going to have a great time. That's why they agreed to the conversation in the first place. And so you will walk away a guaranteed winner of advice, of insight, of conversation practice, and inspiration. You win.
You're right. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about before, is those, emotional intelligence and being able to read the room, so to speak, and then also being able to connect that in a more metacognitive way to your career aspirations in that sense. So great advice, Sean. Sean, I've enjoyed this conversation so far, but we've reached the part of the show where I ask our guests for the gem. What is that one piece of wisdom you like to impart on teachers who are considering pivoting to another career?
So there's a quote that hit me like a ton of bricks. I know I've been giving you a lot of quotes lately, but I imagine your listeners are pretty quote friendly. And it was something around when I was sort of facing some challenges and wondering about what the right path ahead was. And it's a Zen proverb, and it says, obstacles are not blocking your path. They are the path. And I think about, imagine you've joined a gym and you walk into the gym and you see the treadmill and you're like, oh, watch out for that. And there's the weights. Oh, careful. And you just avoid all of those obstacles. What have you learned and how have you grown? This process, as challenging as it will be at times, where you're feeling self-doubt, you may even feel rejection, understand that the process itself is going to be an amazing growth opportunity. Growth doesn't happen when you get the job offer. Growth happens along the way through that process. So even if you are struggling and you're not getting the outcomes you're looking for, remember that the destination is the journey itself, and that you are gaining from everything, from every setback. Never leave the gift store of adversity empty-handed. There is going to be a challenge ahead. There are people in your world that you can connect with that want to help you. If you bring authenticity, your natural enthusiasm, and you're not afraid to show some personality without being personal, understanding there's a human on the other line that wants to connect with you. And so go out there, take risks, do exactly what you would coach your students to do. And that is step out of your comfort zone and put yourself out there and understand that there will be setbacks, there will be rejections, and you just need to keep going because you stick with the system and it'll come eventually.
That is a true gem, Sean. And as you're talking and this whole entire conversation, while I feel the system has lost a great, marvelous teacher by the name of Sean, I know that you are thriving in all the work that you're doing and building those authentic relationships with the different clientele and the students that you're working with. I want to thank you. It's been such a great pleasure. You've given so much wisdom for those teachers that are tuning in and looking to make a career change. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone would like to reach out to me directly, please feel free to do so.
And we'll put that in the show notes where they can reach you. Thanks so much again.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you know when new episodes are uploaded. We'd also love to hear your feedback. Leave a review or connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at 85 After School. Hey, if you're interested in being a guest, be sure to email us directly, 85afterschool@gmail.com. That's 85afterschool@gmail.com. Until the next episode, be good to yourself.